"You'll be mine tonight?" whispered the mini-alien noblewoman. The planet was alive with shimmering lights, dazzling colors that seemed to defy the laws of nature. The gala was an event unlike any Eric Donovan had ever seen before. As the captain of a human diplomatic vessel, he had attended many high-profile events, but this was different. This gathering of the galaxy's most powerful families was unlike anything his people had encountered. The air hummed with tension, power, and influence that could shift the course of entire civilizations. Eric had been invited, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an outsider in a world he barely understood. He stood on the balcony of the Grand Hall, gazing out over the expansive city below. The stars shone brightly, but it was the city's artificial lights that seemed to draw Eric in, pulsating in intricate patterns across the landscape. He had always been fascinated by the way different civilizations approached technology. Some relied on the power of machines, while others trusted in the wisdom of ancient traditions. And then there were those, like the people of this planet, who had perfected the art of blending the two. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the heated conversations taking place inside the palace. Eric's fingers tapped lightly against the railing, a habit that helped him focus when his mind was racing. Tonight was not just a gala, it was a strategic meeting, an opportunity to form alliances with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Eric had come here to negotiate, to push the interests of his people, but even he couldn't deny the allure of the power that surrounded him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "Captain Donovan, I see you're enjoying the view." Eric turned to face the woman who had spoken. Lyra, the mini-alien noblewoman, stood in front of him. At first glance, she might have seemed unremarkable, small in stature and delicate in appearance, but there was something in her eyes that made Eric pause. They were sharp, calculating, and full of a wisdom far beyond her years. Despite her size, she carried herself with an air of authority that made people take notice. Eric had heard rumors about her. Lyra was a political force to be reckoned with, even at her young age. She had the kind of influence that could make or break entire star systems. "Lady Lyra," Eric greeted her politely, though there was an edge to his voice. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Lyra's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile that suggested she knew something he didn't. "And yet here I am," she replied smoothly, stepping closer to the railing. "What brings a human diplomat to a gathering like this? Surely your people have more important matters to attend to." Eric raised an eyebrow. "I'm here to make connections. There's power in alliances, don't you think?" Lyra studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words. "Oh, I'm sure there is. But it's not the alliances that will change the course of history, Captain Donovan. It's the people who hold the power. And I think you've just met one of them." Eric's curiosity piqued, but he didn't let it show. "You're talking about yourself, I assume?" She smiled again, this time with a hint of amusement. "Oh no, I'm just a humble noblewoman, Captain. But there are forces at work in this galaxy that even I can't control. The question is, what role will you play in all of this?" Before Eric could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. A tall alien figure, clad in intricate armor, approached. The presence of this new arrival only deepened the sense of power that seemed to hang in the air. Eric turned to face the newcomer, but the figure's attention was clearly on Lyra. "Lady Lyra, I must speak with you," the figure said, his voice deep and commanding. There was a certain reverence in his tone, one that made Eric feel like an intruder. Lyra's gaze flicked briefly to Eric before she turned back to the armored figure. "Very well, Commander," she nodded, then added with a glance over her shoulder, "Excuse me, Captain, duty calls." Eric watched as she walked away, the mysterious commander following close behind. He could feel the weight of their exchange lingering in the air. It was clear that Lyra wasn't just another noble. She was someone who held real power. The way the commander had spoken to her, as if she were his superior, was a sign of something deeper than mere influence. There was something in the way she moved, the way she commanded the attention of everyone around her, that made Eric question everything he thought he knew about this world. Minutes later, as he re-entered the Grand Hall, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered someone who was far more than just a political player. There was a certain magnetism about her, an energy that drew people in without them even realizing it. It was both captivating and unsettling. The music inside the hall swirled, a melodic blend of alien instruments that filled the space with a strange sense of otherworldliness. The guests were scattered in small groups, engaging in whispered conversations, each one trying to maneuver for advantage. But no matter where Eric looked, it was Lyra who lingered in his mind. She was different from the other nobles. She wasn't just here to impress or to secure power, she was here to take it. Eric's thoughts were interrupted again, this time by the arrival of an older diplomat, a member of his delegation. The man, tall and gaunt, approached with a quick stride. "Captain," the diplomat said with a tight smile, "it's time to get to work. The council meeting is about to begin." Eric nodded, though his mind was still on Lyra. He followed the diplomat toward the meeting room, but as he passed through the crowd, he couldn't help but glance back toward the balcony. To his surprise, he found Lyra standing there once more, watching him from a distance. She was alone now, but there was something in the way she observed him that sent a shiver down his spine. As he entered the meeting room, Eric felt a strange sense of unease. He knew this was more than just a diplomatic mission. The people in this room, these powerful, ancient beings, were playing a game that went beyond mere politics. It was a game of survival, of control, and of influence, and Eric had just been pulled into it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra was playing a different game altogether, a game that he didn't fully understand. And if he wasn't careful, he might find himself a pawn in her plans. The meeting began with formalities, but Eric couldn't focus on the discussions. His mind kept drifting back to the mini-alien noblewoman. What was she really after? And why had she singled him out? As the meeting drew to a close, Eric's thoughts remained tangled in questions. He had come here to forge alliances, but it was clear now that his presence had been no accident. Lyra had wanted him here. She had a purpose for him, a purpose that he was only beginning to understand. But what was it? Eric had only just begun to realize that his mission on this planet was about to become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The forces at play were more powerful than he had ever expected, and one small woman, standing alone on a balcony, might just hold the key to everything. And whether he liked it or not, Eric Donovan was now a part of her game. The evening wore on, the gala's laughter and music continuing to swirl in the air. Eric Donovan, despite his diplomatic training and experience in handling complex negotiations, felt out of place among these alien nobles. The lavish halls glittered with lights from different galaxies, and each guest seemed to carry a certain kind of power that Eric could feel even in his bones. He was not like them. He had come to secure support for his people, hoping to strike deals that would benefit the human race. But the politics in this room were unlike anything he had encountered before. They were subtle, layered with meaning that couldn't be deciphered in a single conversation. He was playing in a game where the rules were unknown and the stakes were high. As the evening passed, he found himself distracted again by thoughts of Lyra. Her presence was undeniable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she had been watching him, even when she wasn't directly in his line of sight. There was something magnetic about her, something that drew his attention without her having to try. And it was clear she wasn't just another noblewoman at the gala. She was someone of much greater significance. While he was speaking with a high-ranking ambassador from a distant solar system, Eric noticed Lyra enter the room once more. She glided through the crowd effortlessly, her eyes scanning the guests as if she were a general surveying a battlefield. Her gaze briefly met his, and Eric felt a jolt in his chest, though he quickly masked his reaction. She didn't smile, didn't give any sign that she had been aware of his gaze earlier. Instead, her expression was unreadable. She was here with a purpose, but what was it? What did she want from him? The thought lingered as Eric excused himself from the conversation and made his way through the crowd. He didn't know why, but something about this night felt off. There was an air of tension beneath the luxury, as if a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. Lyra, still in the midst of mingling with other dignitaries, didn't seem to notice him approach. But just as Eric was about to speak to her, she turned sharply, as though she had known he was coming. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment he couldn't look away. "You're persistent," she said, her voice soft but carrying a certain weight. "I was wondering when you'd come looking for me." Eric's mouth went dry. He had intended to speak with her, but the way she had phrased it made him feel as though he had been caught in a trap. "I've been meaning to speak with you," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "About your earlier words," she smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My words." "You mean the ones that caught your attention?" She leaned in just slightly, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "You'll be mine tonight." The words sent a shiver down his spine, though he didn't let it show. "I don't understand what you're trying to say, Lady Lyra." Her eyes gleamed with amusement. "You'll understand soon enough, but not here, not now." She stepped back and gave him a slow, deliberate look as if measuring him. "Come with me, there's something you need to see." The way she said it, so commanding yet so gentle, stirred something in Eric. He couldn't explain it, but the curiosity inside him flared to life. What was she offering? What did she mean by "you'll be mine"? Reluctantly, but with a sense of inevitability, Eric nodded. "Lead the way." Without another word, she turned and walked through the crowd. Eric followed, his mind racing with a mix of confusion and intrigue. He had seen powerful figures before, but none with the kind of control that Lyra exhibited. She was different. And he had no idea why she was focused on him. They passed through the grand hall, the sounds of laughter and music fading as they moved deeper into the palace. The hallways were quieter here, more private, and the further they went, the more Eric felt a sense of isolation, as if the outside world no longer mattered. They were moving through a space that existed outside time, where only their conversation and whatever she had planned for him mattered. They arrived at a door at the end of a narrow corridor. Lyra paused, turning to Eric. "Are you ready to understand the stakes?" she asked, her voice low and intense. There was something in her tone that made him hesitate, but only for a moment. "I think so," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. With a small, satisfied smile, Lyra opened the door and gestured for him to enter. Eric stepped inside, immediately struck by the change in atmosphere. This room was different from the opulent halls they had left behind. The walls were made of stone, ancient-looking but polished, and there was a strange glow coming from an artifact in the center of the room. Lyra closed the door behind them, and for the first time, Eric was truly alone with her. The weight of the situation settled in. This wasn't just a conversation. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. Lyra took a few steps toward the artifact, her fingers brushing against it. "This is the heart of my family's power," she said, her voice almost reverent. "It has been passed down for generations, and it is the key to everything." Eric watched her closely, trying to understand what she was saying. "What does this have to do with me?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes intense. "Everything. You see, Captain Donovan, I have been watching you. Not because you're a human diplomat, not because you are here to make alliances, but because I need you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded with meaning. Eric couldn't quite grasp what she was implying, but he felt the weight of her gaze as though she were seeing through him to the very core of who he was. "You need me?" he repeated, unable to mask his surprise. Lyra nodded. "Yes. I've been looking for someone with your unique qualities, someone who can help me achieve what I've dreamed of for years." Her expression softened, but it didn't make her words any less chilling. "My family's rule is crumbling, but it doesn't have to. I can take it back. I can be the one who holds the power." Eric took a step forward, his mind racing. "And you want me to help you take control?" Lyra's gaze never wavered. "Yes, but not in the way you think. I don't need your armies or your resources. I need something far more valuable." She walked toward him now, her footsteps quiet but deliberate. "I need your loyalty, and I need your willingness to embrace a new world order." Eric's heart pounded as he tried to make sense of her words. What was she asking? What did she want from him? Before he could speak, Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "And tonight, Captain Donovan, you will choose. You will decide if you are going to be a part of my plan or if you are going to walk away." She was asking him to commit, to join her in whatever this plan was. And in that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about political alliances or diplomatic meetings. This was about something deeper, something personal, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what that might mean. But he couldn't back out now. Whatever was happening, it was already too late. Lyra stepped closer, her voice barely a breath away. "You'll be mine tonight, Captain Donovan, one way or another, and the galaxy will never be the same." Eric had no idea what kind of game he had been pulled into, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just taken a dangerous turn. And Lyra was at the center of it all. The silence in the room was deafening. Eric stood there facing Lyra as her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. His mind raced, trying to process everything she had just revealed. The power she sought, the loyalty she demanded, it all felt like a game, but one with rules he didn't fully understand. Lyra was not just a noblewoman, she was a force. And now she had placed him in the center of her plans. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Eric's gaze flickered toward the strange artifact in the center of the room. It pulsed with a faint glow, almost as if it had a life of its own. The more he looked at it, the more it seemed to beckon him, but he quickly forced his attention back to Lyra. "You're asking me to make a choice," he said, his voice steady, though the tension in his chest was rising. "But you haven't explained everything. What exactly is this plan of yours?" Lyra's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "The details will come later. For now, I need you to understand the power you hold in this moment." She stepped closer to him, the distance between them shrinking with each movement. Her eyes never left his. "You've seen the galaxy. You know how fragile the balance of power is. The slightest shift in alliances can alter everything. But what you don't realize, Captain Donovan, is that I am the one who can tip that balance. I can reshape the future." Eric listened, his mind still working to keep up with her words. She wasn't speaking of diplomacy or politics. She was talking about revolution, about seizing control and remaking the galaxy in her image. But why him? Why had she chosen him? "You want me to help you take control of your family's power," Eric said slowly, as though saying it out loud would help him understand it better. "But how? I'm just a human diplomat." Lyra's smile widened and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "Exactly, you're just a human. And that makes you more valuable than any of these powerful aliens who think they rule the galaxy. They see humans as weak, as insignificant." Her voice dropped to a whisper, and her breath seemed to warm his skin. "But that's where they're wrong. The human race is stronger than they realize. You are stronger than they realize." Eric's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of humans being underestimated before, but the way she said it made him feel like there was something much deeper at play. "What do you mean by stronger?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra tilted her head, considering him. "Humans are unpredictable. You act without hesitation, driven by instincts that others don't understand. And that makes you dangerous. You don't fear the unknown. You don't shy away from challenges. That's why I need you." Her words settled over him like a weight, and for the first time he wondered if he had underestimated the situation. Lyra wasn't just looking for an ally. She was looking for someone who could help her break free from the constraints of her own people. Someone who could challenge the status quo and change the galaxy forever. "I still don't understand," Eric said, feeling more confused by the minute. "What's the next step? What are we doing here?" Lyra took a step back, her eyes scanning him as if searching for something in his expression. "You don't need to understand everything right now. You'll learn in time. But I want you to think about this. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can walk away. You can return to your ship and pretend none of this ever happened. Or," she paused, the word hanging in the air, "or you can step forward and claim your place in history. You can help me change everything." Her words were like a siren's call. Eric could feel the pull, the weight of her offer tugging at him. It was tempting, too tempting. But he couldn't let himself be swept away by her charm and ambition. He needed to think, to understand what he was truly walking into. This was more than just a political alliance. This was power, raw, dangerous power, and it came with consequences. For the first time that evening, Eric took a step back. "And if I say no?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra's gaze darkened, her smile vanishing. "Then you'll have to live with the knowledge that you could have changed everything. You could have been a part of something great." She turned her back to him, her voice now cold and distant. "But you'll remain nothing more than a pawn in a game you can't even begin to understand." Eric's heart raced. Her words were cutting, but they rang with truth. She was right about one thing. The galaxy was a chessboard, and the pieces moved at the will of those with power. But Lyra wasn't asking him to play a game. She was asking him to become a part of her revolution, to stand by her side and help her claim the throne. "Why me?" Eric asked again, his voice almost pleading. "Why me and not one of your own people?" Lyra turned to face him, her expression softening just a little. "Because, Captain, you're the one who sees things differently. You're the one who isn't bound by tradition or honor or the expectations of your people. You're the one who isn't afraid to do what needs to be done." Eric shook his head. "That's a lot of trust you're putting in me, trust that I haven't earned." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she took a step toward him again. "I'm not asking you to earn my trust. I'm asking you to trust yourself." She reached out and touched his chest lightly, just above his heart. "If you want to make a difference, if you want to change the course of this galaxy, then you'll need to stop thinking like everyone else. You'll need to think like a ruler. A ruler." The word echoed in Eric's mind, and for a moment he imagined what it would be like to have that kind of power. To shape the future, to stand at the helm of something that could alter the lives of billions. The idea was seductive, but it also came with a price. "Everything has a cost, Lyra," Eric said, his voice quiet. "You can't just take power and not expect consequences." She smiled again, a look that was both understanding and dangerous. "I know the cost, but I also know that the greatest victories come with the greatest risks." The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of her words settled over him. Eric's heart was pounding in his chest, and every instinct told him to walk away. But something in Lyra's eyes, something in the way she spoke, made him wonder if walking away was really an option at all. "I'll need time to think," he said, though he knew in his gut that his decision was already made. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment and she nodded. "Of course, but don't take too long. Time is something we don't have much of." As she turned to leave, Eric's mind continued to race. What had he just agreed to? What had he just stepped into? The world around him felt like it was shifting, like the ground beneath his feet was no longer steady. Lyra's offer was no longer a distant thought. It was real, and he was now a part of it. He had a choice to make, and no matter what path he chose, he knew it would change everything. The days following his conversation with Lyra felt like a blur. Eric couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irrevocably shifted. Since that night in the private chamber, his thoughts had been consumed by the decision she had placed in his hands. The offer she had made was impossible to ignore. He was caught between a powerful temptation and the cold reality of what it might cost him. Lyra had given him time to think, but every moment felt like a race against an unseen clock. He couldn't focus. Every conversation he had, every meeting he attended felt empty, like he was going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to him. He spent hours staring out the windows of his quarters, gazing at the stars, his mind lost in the vastness of space. He had always known that diplomacy was a game of power, but this was something different. Lyra wasn't just playing the game, she was reshaping it. And she wanted him to play a part. The galaxy had always seemed so big, filled with endless possibilities, but now Eric saw it differently. He understood the delicate balance of power and influence that held everything together. He had known that, of course. It was his job to know it, but Lyra's vision was something else. She wasn't simply interested in negotiating, in forming alliances for mutual benefit. She wanted control, and she wasn't willing to wait for it. That was the part that scared him. She had shown him the artifact, that strange object pulsing in the chamber. He couldn't forget it, the way it seemed to hum with a power that made the room feel charged. Lyra had claimed it was the key to her family's rule. It was something that had been passed down through generations, a symbol of authority and influence that no one else in the galaxy could match. She hadn't explained how it worked, but Eric could tell that she believed it would give her the power to reshape the galaxy in her image. But she wasn't just after power. Lyra's motivations were deeper than that. Her family's rule was faltering, she had admitted that much. The galaxy had changed, and her position was no longer as secure as it once was. But Eric didn't believe that was the only reason she wanted to seize control. There was something personal about it, something far more complicated than just political ambition. The more he thought about it, the more Eric realized that Lyra wasn't offering him a partnership. She was offering him a choice between his own survival and the survival of his people. If he joined her, he would have a hand in reshaping the galaxy. If he refused, he would likely become an enemy, someone who had refused to help when they had the chance. The stakes were high. Eric had always known that his actions could have consequences, but this was something else. This wasn't just a matter of gaining or losing favor with the galaxy's elite. This was a chance to change the balance of power itself, and he couldn't ignore that. After days of uncertainty, Eric finally knew what he had to do. He couldn't walk away from this. Not when it had the potential to change everything. He had always believed that the human race had a unique place in the galaxy, that they were more than just pawns in someone else's game. Now, it seemed like this was his chance to prove it. But as much as he had made his decision, he couldn't help but feel a nagging doubt. Lyra wasn't the kind of person who shared everything. There were too many secrets surrounding her, too many hidden layers that he still didn't understand. What was she really after? What did she need him for? That night, Eric decided to meet her again. He couldn't shake the need to talk to her, to understand what this alliance truly meant. He had been given the time to think, but he knew now that thinking wasn't enough. He needed to act. He found Lyra in the same private room where they had spoken before. The air was cool, and the room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the artifact at its center. She was standing by it, her fingers gently tracing its surface, lost in thought. Eric hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. But Lyra sensed his presence before he could speak. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment the world seemed to still. There was something in her gaze, a sharpness, a kind of intensity that made Eric's pulse quicken. "You've made your decision," she said, her voice low but certain. Eric nodded. "Yes, I've been thinking about it, and I've come to a conclusion. I'm ready to help you." Lyra didn't smile at first. She merely studied him as though evaluating whether he was telling the truth. The silence stretched on for several seconds before she finally spoke. "Good. I knew you would." Her voice softened, and she stepped closer to him, her presence overwhelming in its intensity. "I need you, Captain Donovan, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who understands the bigger picture. Together, we can change everything. The galaxy will bow to us." Eric couldn't deny the allure of her words, the way they resonated with something deep inside him. The idea of standing at the helm of something that powerful was intoxicating. But as much as he wanted to believe in it, there was still that voice in the back of his mind, warning him about the risks. The path Lyra was asking him to walk wasn't a simple one. "You've been honest with me about your goals," Eric said, his voice steady. "But there's still so much I don't understand. What do you really want? What is it that you plan to do once you have this power?" Lyra's eyes flickered with something, an emotion too quick to identify. She seemed to consider his question for a long moment before answering. "I want to change the way things work in the galaxy," she said, her voice more intense now, filled with conviction. "For too long, the powerful families have held all the cards. They've manipulated events, used their influence to control the destinies of entire planets. I want to be the one who decides. I want to reshape the future, not just for my family, but for everyone." Eric frowned. "And what about the people? What happens to them?" Lyra's gaze softened, but there was a coldness behind it. "The people will follow, they always do. When you offer them the right vision, they'll follow you. It's not about the people, Captain, it's about making sure the right people hold the power." Eric's mind was racing. Her words were seductive, but there was something chilling in the way she spoke about control. She wasn't interested in governance or democracy. She wanted dominance, and she would stop at nothing to get it. He took a deep breath. "What happens if I refuse? What happens if I walk away?" Lyra stepped closer to him, her eyes locking with his. "Then you'll be nothing more than a pawn in a game you refuse to play. The galaxy is changing, Eric. Whether you're a part of it or not doesn't matter, but if you stand with me, we will reshape it. Together." For a moment, Eric felt the weight of her words press down on him. He knew what she was offering, the chance to be part of something that could change the galaxy forever, but the cost was something he couldn't ignore. "I've made my choice," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty inside him. "I'll stand with you." Lyra's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Good, you won't regret this, Captain. Together we will make the galaxy bow at our feet." As the words left her lips, Eric felt a surge of both fear and excitement. He had made his decision. There was no turning back now. Lyra was his ally, and together they would change the course of history. But as he stood there, looking into her eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, and the price of power was steep. Eric knew that whatever happened next, it would change him forever. And as Lyra's words echoed in his mind, he realized that he had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. The weeks that followed Eric's decision to join Lyra were a whirlwind of activity. The world around him shifted in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The galaxy, once a place of endless exploration and diplomacy, now felt like a chessboard. Each move mattered. Every alliance was a calculated risk, and at the center of it all was Lyra. She had kept her promises as far as Eric could tell. She introduced him to new allies, showing him the power of her family's influence, and began to lay out the framework for their plans. It was all happening faster than Eric had expected. What had once seemed like a distant dream of reshaping the galaxy was now within reach. But as much as he had hoped for clarity, he found himself tangled in more questions. The first real test came when Lyra asked him to join her on a covert mission to one of the outer colonies, an area rich in resources, but under the control of a rival faction. She said it was time to make a statement, to show the galaxy that they were not just a political force to be reckoned with, but a power capable of sweeping away anyone who stood in their way. Eric had no illusions about what that meant. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. Lyra had made it clear that they would not shy away from force if necessary. This was the path of conquest, and there was no turning back. As they prepared to leave, Eric couldn't help but feel the weight of his decision. He had joined her, yes, but he hadn't truly understood the depth of her ambition. Lyra was not interested in merely taking control. She wanted to reshape the very structure of the galaxy. She wanted to be the one who decided the fate of every star system, every ruler, and every people. But there was something else, something more personal, that had begun to unsettle him. The more time he spent with Lyra, the more he realized that her goals weren't just about power. They were about something deeper, something rooted in her own past. She didn't just want to rule the galaxy, she wanted to destroy the old order. And in doing so, she hoped to rebuild everything on her terms. Eric had heard rumors of her family's struggles. The downfall of her house had been swift and brutal, a result of political maneuvering and betrayal. Lyra's claim to power was fragile, but instead of trying to heal her family's wounds, she seemed determined to burn everything to the ground and start anew. He couldn't help but wonder if she truly understood the consequences of that path. Still, he had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. The mission was straightforward in its objectives. They would infiltrate the rival faction's stronghold, disable their defenses, and send a message to the galaxy. It was a risk, but Lyra was confident they would succeed. Her supporters were powerful, and her vision had already gained the support of many influential figures. Eric, however, wasn't so sure. This was the first time he had been involved in something this risky, and he wasn't sure he liked the taste of it. As they entered the outer colony's atmosphere, the tension in the air was palpable. The ship hummed beneath him, and he could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. He glanced at Lyra, who was calm as ever, her eyes focused on the view ahead. She had always been so composed, so in control. It was both unnerving and captivating. "You seem distant," Lyra said, breaking the silence between them. Eric looked at her, surprised. "I'm not distant," he replied quickly, "just thinking." She tilted her head, her gaze softening for a moment. "You're wondering if this is the right choice." Eric hesitated. "Maybe. I don't know, this feels different from what I imagined." Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It always does, but you made the right choice, Captain. You're exactly where you need to be." Eric didn't respond. He had heard her say those words before, but they didn't make him feel any more certain about his decision. They were approaching the rival stronghold now, and the mission was about to begin. They touched down without incident, landing in a secluded area on the outskirts of the colony. Lyra wasted no time in assembling her team, a group of highly trained individuals who had pledged their loyalty to her cause. Eric was impressed by the efficiency with which they moved, but as they set their plan into motion, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a coldness in the air, a sense that this mission was more than just a power play. It was a message. The operation was swift. They infiltrated the stronghold's outer defenses, neutralizing the guards and taking control of key locations within minutes. Eric moved alongside Lyra, watching as she commanded her team with a calm precision. She was everything he had come to admire about her, ruthless, brilliant, and unstoppable. But as they moved deeper into the stronghold, something changed. Eric began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The further they went, the more it felt like they were entering a hornet's nest. There was no easy way out now. Lyra's plan was unfolding perfectly, but Eric couldn't shake the growing unease that something was about to go wrong. They reached the central command room, where the rival factions' leaders were holed up. Lyra's supporters had already disabled most of their communication systems, but the leaders were still a threat. It was here that Eric's role would come into play. He had been instructed to engage with the leaders, to present them with an ultimatum: join Lyra's cause or face the consequences. But when Eric stepped into the command room, he was greeted by something he didn't expect. The room was empty, save for one figure standing in the center. A woman, tall, with dark hair and sharp features, was standing with her back to him, staring out the window that overlooked the colony. She didn't move when Eric entered, but there was something about her that made him pause. "You've come," the woman said, her voice cold but not unfriendly. Eric froze, unsure of what to do. "Where are the others?" They're gone, the woman replied. The ones who matter, at least. They've already made their choice. Eric's mind raced. He glanced at Lyra, who had entered behind him. Her expression was unreadable, but Eric could see the flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. The choice was never yours to make, Lyra said, her voice low and tense. The woman turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Eric's. You don't know what you've walked into, she said, her gaze flickering between him and Lyra. This is bigger than you think. It's bigger than her. Eric's heart began to pound. He could feel the tension in the room growing, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. What do you mean? He asked, though he feared the answer. The woman took a step toward him, her eyes never leaving his. You're playing a dangerous game, Captain. And soon you'll see what happens when you're not careful. Lyra's hand went to the weapon at her side. Enough of this, she spat. You're not in a position to make threats. But the woman wasn't intimidated. She stepped forward, closing the gap between her and Eric. You think you're making a choice, she said, her voice quiet but filled with menace. But you're not. You're just another piece in a much larger game, and when you finally understand that, it will be too late. Eric's pulse raced as he tried to make sense of her words. Before he could respond, the room was filled with the sharp sound of gunfire, followed by the blinding flash of energy shields. Lyra's team had engaged the remaining forces, but this wasn't just a fight for control, it was a battle for survival. Eric had made his choice. He had chosen to stand with Lyra to help her reshape the galaxy. But now, in the heat of battle, he realized that the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. There was more at play here than just power. And soon, he would learn that the true cost of his decision was only beginning to unfold.